Well, that's okay. I put it.
But does it matter? I mean, I just wanted to ask, just in case.
I mean, we would like to know all your,
Oh, my business.
yeah, all your business, all your business.
My business.
But I'll make sure it gets something.
Okay. Yeah, I was like, oh my gosh, I forgot to add that. Wall Street.
Okay, I'll make sure I put it on there.
So we need to get in line.
Okay.
Not yet.
I email it to you so I can probably, that's what we see. You was late on that. You were late. No, it was very fancy. That was my daughter. We need to up the quantities. Well, the next one will be different because it'll be a walk-in. So your tea will be ready to go. And it will probably be flavored iced tea because it's in June. So you'll have to catch us in November because I'm going to do the quarter.
And then something else on the schedule.
It's June 10th to tie everything has to be on screws because you're walking around.
How you doing?
So I have to meet with my
here,
team
man.
next week
I know we
to make the
in this little album thing. I met the other night. Yeah, here, bro. You used to be on the what's the name? Yeah. You good, man? Did okay, you still your town.
Okay, how are you?
Nice to meet you, man. See, very smart young man, man. I was listening to you speak the other night, and then I didn't know you had typed up.
No, I was saying that I spelled your name right.
Yeah, well, that's good.
I was saying if I spelled your name right, but I didn't.
Yeah.
So you from originally?
Because I know I emailed it to you. Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't know when I remembered it. What I remembered it yesterday.
That's okay. I sent another lady a form. I'm hoping that
You can't just
she'll
get up.
fill it out and send it back. And I said at least we have, do an intake have seeing what happened.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But I don't do that.
You what you said? For the state. Oh, okay. You used to do this.
Yeah.
Back in, I mean, council. Okay. Oh, I thought you were with the city. Like, you started with the city. No, you just council.
Oh, no, I'm not giving me advice.
That's hey, I admire that. Hey, congrats, man. Yeah, that's big. I was tripping out. That's big. That's deep. I'm born and raised here, but I didn't.
Oh, they had it up. You gonna go to this one now?
Yeah, I had never been to the military.
They got it lined up and ready to
Yeah, and
go.
then I name who it is. Yeah, that's what we said in California. I understand it because I was stationed in California. And I didn't want to be West Coast athlete. When I first got to the city, I had a great time in Georgia. But then, a couple of years, I was like, you know what? I want to be here. I had a son here, my family was here. And I was trying to get home. I would have rather got some. They said, yeah. It didn't work out. They said I was West Coast
I used to
athlete.
visit Norfolk every other weekend.
Really?
Yeah, I went to school in Central Virginia.
Okay.
So, how you doing?
Right.
I'm fine, thank you. Good to see you.
Hampton, Norfolk, Hollywood. Which that's a bad place to compete. Portsmouth.
Okay, yeah.
So, but yeah, I used to go there quite a bit. Lots of military. My best buddies in college, man, my dad.
Oh, what? Yeah.
That's how they ended up.
That's good, but we're waiting.
We had anyway. You over there.
How long you left?
3.5 years.
Somebody was just.
I would like to call our meeting to order.
Hey, Jane, how you doing? Where your
I would
name?
like to start by welcoming everyone, our guests and the commission members. It's good to see you all. And welcome to the mayor who is here. So it's definitely good to see you all. I'm excited about our agenda today. And I would like to start off by taking the roll. Dwayne Barton,
Present.
Norma Baines,
Here.
Renata Conyers. Here. Ronetta Copeland. Christopher Gordon. Roy Harris.
Here.
Joyce Harrison. Here. Shonda Jackson. Kimberly Jones. Here. Dewana Little, I'm here. Dwayne McAfee.
Here.
Tamari Macon. Here. Bobette Mays.
Present.
Glenda McDowell.
Here.
Tamara Miller.
Here.
Dr. Miller, not here. Mildred Nance Carson. Bernard Oliphant.
Present.
Thomas Priester. Jesse Ray. Dwayne Richardson.
Here.
Eric Robinson.
Here.
Raynita Waters. Cece Weston.
Here.
D. Williams. Here. MZ Yehuda.
Present.
Keith Young.
Here.
D. Burris. Present. Tiffany Develop. Develop. Shakiki Giles Baden. Osandu McPeters. We have a quorum, so we will move forward. I would like to, let y'all know that, Dr. Mullins will not be here. He had a loss in his family. And so, that's why he's not here chairing tonight. But he does send his love to. I would like to also say hi to the city manager back there in the back as well, who is here. So, Have everyone had a chance to review the minutes? Are there any questions about the minutes? Concerns?
Madam Chair, I move that the minutes be accepted as written.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? All those abstaining? Well, the minutes have been approved. So I'd like to turn it over to Christine Edwards to review our February 20 meeting survey data.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Edwards. I am the project manager for the Community Reparations Commission. Thank you all for being here tonight. So just briefly to go over the survey data, it is included in your agenda packet. I hope that y'all have had a chance to review it. There were not a lot of responses, but the responses were pretty positive. I will just point out a couple of comments that stood out. I think a few people commented on the fact that we did IFA updates at the top of the meeting, and that really allowed more time for the commission to engage and collaborate with one another and hear from one another. And then also comments being shared about being able to cover the full agenda. We also had, in terms of room for improvement, time management, offering the idea of a quarterly work session. There's a comment about explaining conflict of interest, making sure that we're talking about, what the details of the funding availability, just talking more about that, and then also making sure we're dedicating time for questions after each presentation. So if y'all, want to get a chance to review those review the survey data, please do that. We try to be mindful and listen to everyone and incorporate your feedback. Okay, I'm gonna hand it over to our IFA facilitators and spokespersons for their update, but I do also just want to remind you, I'm gonna be facilitating and timekeeping this evening. So we're gonna hear from 2 IFA groups, and each group will have 15 minutes each. At the 2-minute mark, when they have 2 minutes left, I'll hold up a 2-minute sign, and when their sign is up, I'll hold up the time is up sign. And I do encourage y'all to jot down your questions and comments that you have, and wait till the end so that we can do the discussion part. I also have some comment cards if you want to make sure you get your thoughts in the room, but are not able to put them in the conversation, but still wanted to come back to us. We will definitely take your comments on these note cards as well. All right, so the first IFA work group we're going to hear from is education, and they're going to be presenting from the podium. Awesome. Everyone should go. All right. Should have also their presentation, so you can follow along. It's in your printed out packet.
Hi everyone. My name is Dr. Vera. I'm the facilitator for the education work group. I'll give the folks around me a second to introduce themselves as well.
Couldn't hear you.
A little bit louder.
MZ.
I'm CC Weston.
And I'm Asandu McPeters.
There are a few more folks who are in our group who are unable to join us today. That's Tiffany Develo, Chris Gordon, Thomas Priester, and Shauna Jackson. And I will share a bit about what we've been working on, and you all will jump in. We have worked on a series of proposals that we look forward to bringing to this group. The key one around Black recruitment and retention of teachers is a big package that has several initiatives within it. We have a set of proposals around expulsions and in-campus suspensions and out-of-school suspensions of Black youth. We are working on Black youth engagement and programming opportunities within the community, including freedom schools, summer enrichment programs, Saturday schools, and the replacement of community for youth. We have conversations starting around community engagement events to bring folks in to not only review the proposals, but to get continued community feedback regarding the needs of youth and education in our community. It is not lost on this group, the articles and the data coming out from both the city and the county regarding the reading rates of Black youth in our community, with 11% of Black youth being at third grade literacy, as compared to 66% of Black youth. 89% of students that are in gifted and talented programs in Asheville City Schools are white. We know that not 89% of gifted students are white. There are stark disparities in the outcomes of Black youth, as well as the opportunities afforded to them, and that is what this group is working on, to both remedy the harm, to course correct them, and to propose community-based solutions that will get at the multi-level, multi-layer reasons for these disparities.
So essentially, a lot of what we're doing is already in front of you, but I want to point out a couple of key things. One, we've had people come to our IFA meetings and they've shared their input so far for proposals that we have. One key thing that was shared at our last meeting was a mother with children was listening to a couple of our proposals and had given us some feedback that these are all great ideas, but essentially it's gonna, transportation is needed. What if you work multiple jobs and you can't make these meetings? And what about these programs that you're looking to actually propose and start doing? There's going to be a lot of logistics that's going to be required for both students and parents to attend. So that to me was very important. So our next steps are we're looking to branch out to the other IFAs so that we can discuss, one, how to maybe remedy the issues within each other, and two, to see if anything else comes about from what they've heard as far as ways that we need to kind of, I guess, revamp or rework our proposals to make a better fit for community recommendations. We've heard accountability a lot within our meetings, and so the next phase for us is to reach into the community so that we are accountable to see that we have our proposals, but we're looking at what about the community? What about the actual communities that have been harmed and that continue to get harmed? What do they think? So Health and Wellness had an event with RJC, the United Way. We're looking to plan another one of those events specifically for us so that we can get more feedback from the community so that we can better prep for some of our proposals. We're still looking at data, but we're talking about other ways that we can get it through stories, Stevens Lee, UNCA, ways that we can maybe get it if we're not going to be given the data within our proposals. So I thought those were three key initiatives that we're also working on right now. I have reached out to other IFAs, and we do look to start to come together and branch out to those for input. We tried to this month, it didn't really work out, but hopefully next month we can get to most of our other IFAs so we can start to collaborate on some of our ideas.
Yes. To Sonja's point, I want to amplify three things that you said. There are several topics that are coming up in education and IFA that are actually full commission conversations, and so we just want to offer them to you. This idea about transportation and centralizing resources repeatedly comes up in our group, that maybe folks don't necessarily want to go to different community centers, that the populations of Black folks have moved, that perhaps it would be better suited if all of the resources and programming that we're seeking to create was actually in one place. That is not really up to us to decide as a group alone, but it is something that we repeatedly get feedback from, both in our meetings and outside of the space, this co-location of resources for folks rather than putting them nestled in communities that folks aren't there. Accountability is repeatedly coming up of the need to hold the private sectors, like for our group, for instance, the school board is the governing body. there's limitations to what the government is able to dictate within those spaces. How do we actually hold that system accountable, or private entities accountable to enact those things? Should be a co-created solution from this group based upon all of our recommendations and efforts, and that's something that we look forward to bringing to individual conversations to revisit as well.
And I just want to emphasize the centralized, place where the community can speak, and so that, again, as Dr. Lavender and Sandu said, that has come up on more than one occasion. One interesting thing that occurred in one of our last meetings is that there was, of course, there are community members who are able to come in and, give their input, but one of the community members wanted to look at, as we were talking about, focusing on compensation and retention and recruiting of Black teachers, really wanted to look at how we were going to determine that, and pretty much who we're going to look at. How is that going to look? Who's going to be the person that determines who's going to be able to do or be a part of that? And so, and the conversation came up, well, maybe we can do a DNA test. And so, of course, I said, no, I don't think that's going to work. Because we can find that in DNA testing, a lot of people will qualify and still would not allow the people who we're trying to reach get the services or even be a part of the recruitment package. And so it's been very interesting. And as Sandu said, we're trying to reach out to other IFAs so that we can collaborate better on how we come up with the reparations.
This idea of defining folks, of setting parameters, again, is a full commission decision. I've had several conversations with folks outside of this group that are either at CUNY Law or who have done reparations in their local municipalities, and they've offered two kind of distinct practices in the way that recommendations are written. Some are written without descriptors. The law folks specifically have a proposal that isn't written naming Black folks, but instead says things like lived experience or folks who have experienced stop and frisk. It sort of delineates impact rather than defining identity. We have other folks who have written more specific Black folks, this structural, like, went after it in the language. We're to a point, I think, in our work where we need to make a decision about how it's going to be written and what the definitions of qualifications will be, and look to this group for being co-collaborators in the definition, sort of revisiting, is this called reparations? Is it called something else? How are determinations identified when there's a recruitment of Black teachers? Who counts as being recruited? And to Cece's point, how will that determination be? Are all definitions that we look forward to teasing out together? We do see that as more of a longer working meeting, which was what we're thinking will happen at this community engagement event. So that's a pre-plug for what that work will look like, where we're talking about our proposals, but we're also digging into like what these larger definitions might mean for our work, so that we can all be in lockstep with one another.
Questions?
Joyce, I think we're going to first. You go first? Yes. Okay. Have you looked at what parts of the county or the school systems in the county that you're looking at? You know, when the schools were integrated, they did not, when the zoning was done by the city, it did not take in all the city students that lived in the city limits, but they sent them to the county schools, okay? So how are you looking at what's happening with those kids that are in the county schools but the families live in the city? Is there any look at that?
We've not looked at that specifically, but we know that is an issue. And so I think the thing that we're doing is looking at the demographics of all both of the school systems, and actually the charters and the private schools. So we are trying to get those demographics too, so that we can see who's where, what the percentages look like. Also want to look at who's progressing in school, who's been suspended in those schools, and all of that. So
Okay,
we are looking at that.
okay.
And Ms. Harrison too as well, one thing that we are looking in conjunction, even though we haven't directly looked at that, we're looking at the teachers for those students within those schools. So one of our recommendations is looking at essentially, the kind of DSEC order kind of manipulated, how many students of color have to be within the schools. We're looking at it as an idea of, well, if there's one for students, why not teachers? So essentially that way, even though they may be sporadic and spread out, that essentially there's enough teachers of color for those students that can help them impact as well. But thank you for that feedback. That is a good recommendation for us to take back.
The question I have is, how will your IFA interact with the school board's process now of recruiting a new superintendent? Because remember, I think we've had 5 superintendents in the last 5 to 6 years.
We're in direct communication with the Asheville City School Board, and they're on the listserv that we have, and when are able to attend our meetings. What we're looking to do is actually have a co-meeting with Asheville City Schools Board and Buncombe County School Board to ensure that when we present our recommendations, we present them to each other at the same time. I think to just say something extra is there will have to be community action. There'll have to be some sort of support for this, because again, the entity that's responsible for enacting and saying what happens in schools is the school board. And so we'll be looking to this group and other community engagement groups to ensure that there's support and not only understanding of the recommendations, lobbying for those recommendations, and further support, but we have had preliminary conversations and they are supportive and knowledgeable of what these recommendations may be. And we're in communication about the hiring of the superintendent as well.
I'm curious around suspension and expulsions. Did you look at the data of the SRO program and how that impacts especially African-American young males in particular? And that we pick up that tagline from school to the prison pipeline. So I'm curious, did you look at the SRO program and how it fits into discipline?
We didn't so much, we haven't dissected that whole program. That is a part of our recommendation, but that is part of the reason why that Stop the Harm is one of our top tiers for what we're looking to do. Mr. Gordon, who's not here yet, has mentioned that, and that is a part of our recommendation for inclusivity and also working with them so that it first addresses but stops that harm.
It revamps the whole process truly and injects advocates. So we looked at just the data of the in-school and out-of-school suspensions, as well as the research, evidence-based reforms and research that will support and mitigate those harms, and then produced a set of proposals that include all of those evidence-based solutions, which includes family advocates, know your rights, community support, as well as tracking systems. And then we have to understand that when you create tracking systems, you have to have a way to hold those systems accountable, and that's again where we come back to this accountability piece repeatedly, where we can design a system that should work to hold folks to a certain standard, but there has to be sort of in-school and district-wide support of those initiatives in order for them to be enacted and held in fidelity. And that's where we're at.
I might have asked this question for sure before, but I'm not for sure. Have you found out the percentage from the city school and the county school of African-American teachers, and what was of them leaving?
I think you're asking, do we know the percentage of black teachers and how many are leaving?
Percentage of working for the Asheville City School and percentage of working for the county, Buncombe County Schools. And do you know why, I don't know, you would know exactly why they were leaving, but have you maybe come up with an idea of asking them why they're leaving, and I guess some of it could be for pay, that's understandable, but just trying to figure that out.
Yeah, we've collected data on it. Well, it's been kind of but we have had the school district HR team speak to us. We have heard testimony or lived experience from folks who are in that system who have talked about being pushed out, either as teachers or as IAs trying to get their teaching credentials and the barriers that exist within both systems to progressing through their education and then getting that job. We do know that retention issues for Black teachers increasingly are difficult, in part because you have to, it's sort of the class is like they're integrating school buildings every day, all the time, and all of that lived experience of being the only Black teacher and having, being responsible for the behaviors of all Black youth, and then experiencing the micro and macro aggressions of your lived experience as a professional. Then you're pushed out because you can't afford to live here and you're commuting 30 minutes and you go, I can just live somewhere else. And so that's why a part of our Black recruitment and retention package is built on several things, which is build your own. Folks who are from here and getting the resources to stay here and find education as a viable career, but also recruiting people and putting the necessary supports around them, both financially and socially, to support them in staying in what will be a challenging set of years until the diversity is increased within the school population, the teaching population.
I just want to add one more thing.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
So can you write your next question down? And so the note cards that we just passed around, is if you can't
We'll come back to it.
get into it, and so we'll come back to it so that we can address all the questions. So write them down, and we're going to move, and thank y'all so much for y'all's report. We're going to move to our next IFA group, which is health and wellness. So please write your questions down after health and wellness presents. We will get back to those questions that you have written in.
And you can follow along in your packet. She has, they've got some visuals in there too, so make sure you're following along.
Yeah, so you should have some visuals. I'm just excited to have our team group up here. Ms. Norma, Tamara, and Ms. Renata.
You might have to get closer to the microphone.
I'm sorry. What you'll see in your packets is a little bit of a visual when we talk about how we do this process with health and wellness, where we work with the technology of participation method. And what you will see is we've got about 8 categories of recommendations, the clusters of that. And we wanted to touch a little bit on the provision of, of access, free access to health care for African Americans. And the central question was, where do we want to see ourselves with these recommendations in 3 to 5 years? And under a previous system of setting priorities, it was along a time frame. So we've got a kind of color-coded metric here about red meaning it needs to be an immediate type of designation that we wanted to be able to see if that could be an immediate set of recommendations. Short-term, yellow, green, midterm, and then blue, long-term, those that would take a little longer, maybe that are late in policy or in areas that would take us a lot more time, whether it's at the local level or whether they might be impacted by state or national laws or regulations. And so some of the recommendations in this first category, and again I'm looking at this here in your packet, is that we're talking about free access to health insurance for African Americans. We know in Buncombe County about 11% of individuals are uninsured. We're working with additional data requests around some of this information so that we can get more specifics about specifically how many African Americans are uninsured in Buncombe County. The creating of non-punitive access to substance abuse treatment. We hear all the time that it's a critical need for substance abuse treatment and resources here. How is that impacting African Americans in Buncombe County? And how can we get more resources allocated to that? And what resources are currently available? So we'll be making additional data requests of Department of Health and Human Services. What is already being funded so that we can understand that, and then what level, if we see what the need is, then where's the disparities and the differences between what the need is and what's actually happening. Then critical needs around suicide. The lack of resources around suicide rates. And again, how is that impacting the Black community here? So again, a lot of our information, as we were just throwing out a lot of these recommendations, we need to go back and do a deeper dive into what the stats look like to support these requests. Identifying African Americans here in Asheville and Buncombe County with chronic health diseases, and what do the percentages look like, which are the top 3 to 5 of those, and then being able to look at what resources are needed to support healing from those chronic illnesses and the care needed to address those. Access to dental care, insurance, again, same thing. Something that's critical here is dental care and the lack thereof for many different populations, but specifically what is it for the African American community, where is it lacking? And then Medicaid, Medicare reforms. And this, you'll see the little metrics where the first several of those, we had an exercise where the commissioners decided to put dots where they felt in these timelines what were the most critical. So the first several of those, we have yellow dots where we're talking about short-term implementation. It would be great to see that in the shorter term. And then again, toward the end, when you're talking about reforms, which we know we're talking about policy initiatives, we may be talking about local and state and national policy, understanding that that's going to be a deeper dive, a heavier lift to impact some of those changes. So we got this in all the categories. So when we look at the other 7 categories of recommendations, we also have ranked them that way. And so we'll end up clustering all of those so that we're looking at the critical, the ones that the group has decided to prioritize first, and then to those that they take a much longer time to affect some change, but are still worthy of us. You've got to start somewhere. So we're interested in doing that. One of the things that you'll also see, and we are excited about this, the event that took place on Saturday, and I'm excited that most of the commissioners were here. They're going to speak to some of this, but we were able to have the first IFA joint partnership with the Racial Justice Coalition, as well as the Center for Participatory Change, and sponsored great food, child care, caucusing, people able to come together and talk about what we felt was an opportunity that the public wanted. We've had requests from different groups about, can we work together, can we go out into the community and have folks weigh in on what health and wellness was doing. Ms. Norman,
Hello, everyone. Our meeting with RJC was very informative. We were so glad to see so many people there. And we had youth there also, and they spoke, which was very good. I think one of the young ladies also spoke to us when we had our meeting in February. And she talked about her experience in her school and what had happened to her. She was bullied, and then her parents had to put her in another school. So this is, I think, is common in the school today. So this is an issue that we want to consider, you know, with the way we are doing it, doing things, and how can we help these young people better in school, because they're there to learn, not to be bullied. One of the things that happened also at the meeting, a gentleman mentioned that he was having a time getting a doctor in Asheville. He could go to his home and get a doctor, but he couldn't find one in Asheville. And I think that is so important that we all need a doctor. And we need them, especially when you have a crisis, that's the one thing you need. A doctor that you feel comfortable with, a doctor you can go to. So I think that's one of the things that we'll be looking at. What's happening in Asheville that you don't have your own private doctor? And it's not always due to the funds, okay? Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. And, Renata, so I do want to see on this, it turned out great, some of the IFAs with their commissioners. There was one girl there, and I know.
You're not loud.
Oh, you can't? I'm not loud enough?
No.
I'm loud everywhere else, y'all can't hear me?
Trying to be funny.
Oh, yeah, you're loud. So what I wanted to talk about, make a long story short. Years ago, I used to work at the high school. I still work for the county, but we had a health center at the high school, Asheville High, Asheville, and Irvingdale. Well, at our meeting here with RJC on February 25th, one of the students was there, so she's graduated doing her own business, LLC and everything, and she brought up something that was really, how she was running from a domestic violence thing, and it was just, that is something the health and wellness, we are also looking into. I personally would like to look into it. And as a personal experience, my sister in Baltimore as well, she is an advocate for missing children. And when this young girl spoke, which I'm wrong to not bring her business card with me, she just brought on something very important to me, finding care for domestic people. You can talk to someone, yes you can, but, and trying to get young people to understand when you get in a domestic situation, this is the health and wellness thing, try not to bring your ex-partner back into that situation because it starts all over again. It's another cycle. And I personally would love to have another health and wellness thing, and I think the education people said they wanted to have us, wanted with us too, but also I would love to hear about other groups, we having another event as well sometime before the year is out, 2 more events if possible. I don't know if that could be possible, but we can try. I'm looking forward, and I do want to say this, I'm kind of really enjoying this year, 2023. Things are looking better up for our group. Like I said, there's only 4 of us, but we're rocking it. We're still waiting on our data information, but we are still we're much better, doing better without it just as well. So, thank you.
I also wanted to thank Dr. Macon because her field, she's on faculty at UNC and Mayheck. And one of the things that's exciting about having somebody who's doing this 24/7 is the fact that when we get into the accountability discussion, Dr. Lavender also talked about it. It's a little interesting for health and wellness because who are the accountability partners in Buncombe County that we would go in front of? Would it be Mayheck? Would it be a Mission? So again, her expertise has been great to give us some feedback about how things are working in general when it comes from an educator's standpoint in public health, but also someone who's very got an inside scoop of how things are run and how practices go.
That's kind of you. Thank you, Dion. I wanted to say, I think this cuts across different impact focus areas. It came up in the education work group around, it's really the Asheville City School Board that makes certain decisions with the schools. And we've come across that certainly in health. Well, city and county can't really necessarily provide health insurance, so what are some ways we can get around that? And I want us all to think about and to work together around ways we can leverage city-county influence in different ways to work with these bigger systems. So maybe there's certain programs or contracts that city and county have with health systems or other entities with our IFAs, and ways that we can work with that to incentivize certain behavior that we want.
A couple of additional things with the February 25th event. One, I wanted to say thank you so much to all the commissioners. We had several guest commissioners come in, and that was great. The fact that there were also some things that we're now adding to our list to be incorporated for us further discussion. Like Dwayne was great in talking about what about growing spaces, what about environmental factors that would affect health and wellness. Can you grow your own fruits and vegetables? Are you able to have community gardens? Some things that we just weren't thinking about directly. So it was great to have that input. We are looking forward, hopefully, to having some additional ones. Thank you, Dr. Lavender and others in education, because they are saying, yes, we meet sometimes at the same time. Let's go together and have a continued conversation about this. So we're looking forward to doing that, to again open those up. And I have to keep saying thank you to RJC and CLC, amazing partners. This was one of the things where we just weren't sure what the turnout would be. Aaron Barksdale, others, Tiffany, goodness, Phyllis. We're just really excited to be able to have had this opportunity to come together on a cold, rainy Saturday and have the room full of people talking about what this could look like with reparations in Buncombe County around health and wellness. So just extremely grateful and looking forward to a larger, even we're going to grow out of that United Way. We've already been talking about having it at Goodwill or other places if we need a larger space, because we were actually kind of wall to wall, basically. So, anything else? I think that's it. Yeah.
Just really quickly, I have 3 considerations. One, well, this isn't one. First, I want to say you all are doing a great job. Continue to do the work that you're doing. My first consideration is, have you all had any conversations about access to mental health care? 2 would be a cross-focus area with education on mental health. And then 3, you all mentioned domestic violence, a cross-focus area with criminal justice and housing.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And also, I'd like to congratulate you on your good work and your progress. I'd just like to ask if any consideration has been paid to the lack of financial and other resources as a stressor. The social determinants of health and the lack of resources are preeminent. Way before folks get sick, they get made sick by lack. Is that the social determinants of health? Is that an overarching principle with your group?
Yes.
And also the accountability mechanisms that can be built in to any managed healthcare system, such as there are now with the Medicaid system, in terms of funding and performance metrics and data so vital. Is that something that's happening?
We are talking all about social determinants of health. One of the things that all of us have been working along that, the intersections around social determinants of health. What's housing? Again, healthy fruits and vegetables, environmental factors, what does healthy housing look like? All of these social determinants of health are things that we are working with, and I'm going to be also bringing from where I work professionally with Impact Health. It's all about social determinants of health and the Healthy Opportunities pilot with Medicaid transformation in North Carolina. But we also have a great gallery of supporters that are from organization Healthcare for All. They came on Saturday. They come generally on a regular basis to help talk about the events for people coming together all throughout the state around how do we look at the expansion of Medicaid and Medicare to specifically reach out and provide services to those who need it and those who are uninsured or even underinsured. We have a great issue in North Carolina in general, but also in Buncombe County, with not just uninsured, but underinsured, and how do we make sure those individuals don't fall through the cracks.
Thank you. We would like to ask if y'all could stay up there. We should have let the education group stay up there as well, because now we're going to open it up for questions. If you wrote any questions down, if you have any further questions from this group, we want to allow time for people to really ask the questions. And have the general discussion around what we've heard in the presentations we've received today.
Thank you all.
Thank y'all. Do y'all have any more questions? Okay, a couple of comments for education. Go ahead.
And they're really just comments. I'm becoming increasingly aware of our need to think about funding. We have things that we want to accomplish, and obviously they're going to take dollars to get it done. So I'm wondering, with the education group, what type of federal funds can they research and become aware of that can be available, what the qualifications would be for a group of this nature to receive some of that funding towards our goals. And second, North Carolina has a lottery that they constantly tout as the education lottery. And so in what ways could the education IFA research and identify ways to get funding through the North Carolina lottery system to help towards their goals.
Can I repeat back? You said federal funding for supportive initiatives?
And yes, and like I said, I don't know if that's feasible. I'm just wondering if there's federal funding for a body of this nature, something that could be brought to bear to help towards the funding of your recommendations, things of that nature, and essentially the same type of thought using the North Carolina Education Lottery. It seems right now that one of the biggest benefactors of the North Carolina Education Lottery is law enforcement, and that seems inappropriate to me. And so if there is a way that some of that funding could be procured for the education aspect of this, I think it would be a grand use for those funds.
I will say that to both of your questions, there's greater research that I would need to do before I could answer that intelligently, but I will say that one of the things that we're seeking to do with our recommendations is to actually map out which body of funding or municipality would be best served to enact that idea. So for instance, like a freedom school that's Afrocentric, that's probably going to be more of a private body of fund potentially, whereas an initiative to support a housing credit or something might be a different funding body. So that is one of the activities that we plan to do as a group, is to say which body of money allows us to remain true to our intentions of what we want to enact with this recommendation, which group can we actually hold accountable, which group is actually beholden to us. So the federal government, I mean, they have buckets of money that come to be all the time, and so I think, to your point, I can't say what is there or what isn't. And I think about lottery systems, I don't know if you mean the charter school lotteries, I just will say that, is that what you mean? No.
The way that when the lottery was
Like
passed,
Education, you know, when they pay money and buy lottery tickets, that's supposed to go to education.
See, I'm like the school lottery system. Got it. I'm like, you can pick your spot lottery. Yeah, we can definitely look into that. I have answered your question, but I will certainly look that up.
okay, thank you.
Bobette?
Yes, about education.
30% of the lottery revenue comes from education. Goes to education. Thank you so much. That's community right there. 30% goes to education.
There it is. Thank
So I
you.
do have a question. I was looking at the key harms addressed in your presentation, and it touched on segregation and desegregation of public schools order of 1972 and 1991. Is that just data? Because that's not really when the schools were segregated. I don't call it desegregated. And they were segregated all the way up until maybe the very early 60s. So I was wondering what that gap, because by 72, that was all gone. So I was trying to understand, because the most harm came in the 60s, when they actually did the desegregation of the school system. I'm not a data person. I don't claim, I'm a person that, I was there. I'm just speaking on, you know, what I remember, what I know from the 50s and 60s. But I think that's I don't know, unless there's a public schools order that states that 1972 and 1991 was part of that desegregation process. That had already gone. We had already finished with the riot of '69. All of that was over, and we were already integrated at that time. So that's kind of confusing to me.
Yeah. I'll say, I have a few thoughts. Those are the actual deseg order timelines that we're working from. I mean, as you all know, we were charged with documenting the harm and then linking our recommendations to the harm, to sort of create a delineation of recommendations. I'll say that one of the schools of thought that I'm a part of is that from the recommendations, I'd rather choose the pin piece of harm that has the strongest amount of data and proof that shows the trajectory to bolster the recommendations that are ultimately proposed to the city. I say all to say that I'm not this isn't the hill I'm sitting on regarding these orders or the harms, I'm sorry, keep saying. You know, it could be said that the fact that the Asheville City Schools were forced to desegregate because they did not do it in all deliberate speed is the central harm. That they had to do it so quickly because they did not follow the federal order is the site of, or the start of the violence that ensued on Black youth after. But that's just a conversation that we've been having as a group, and we haven't really landed on when we're gonna pinpoint it. Is it the fact that they didn't follow the federal legislation and then were charged to do this twice, were found to not be in compliance and then had to do it twice, and then each time the way they enacted the policy was haphazard and or not in consideration of what was best for Black youth remains to be seen. I think it just really it depends on which recommendation ties best to that timing. But I really plan to revisit the dates that you're saying so that we can find better data about it. There is lacking city and county data from those times that we're trying to piece together to actually be able to show what happened. It's been kind of difficult.
I do kind of understand that as the way you put that, and just with the insight of there was still redlining going on where they were actually moving. If they had too many African Americans in one school, especially in the county, they would redline, just draw a line straight down the street and say this side go here, and the other side, you know, it's green, and the other side you go here, because there were too many African Americans in this one school system. And so that was how they divided the line. So they separated families and communities. So I think it's a very hot topic that we could really delve in as far as housing, education, all of those things. So I appreciate that.
And that's a great point. I'll say we did look into, Brad, we did talk about the desegregation order and what that would take to lift. And I'm not going to say this perfectly, but I think I'm going to use an interpretation to say that at this point, has to go to it's federal, the state or federal. So it would be deciding to say, are we going to sue the state or federal government to lift this desegregation order, which if you look at current data, both districts are in compliance with. But it would be deciding to sue to lift it without understanding truly the implications of what that would mean in practice to say that there is no more recommendations or responsibility for either of these entities to report on where Black students are. Because that is what is being enacted now. So we've looked into that and certainly can hear greater community feedback. But I will say, if I may speak for this group, that from that conversation, I don't know if that's the lawsuit we would take up with the state or federal government.
That was instituted by James Ferguson. And then the city of Asheville played a pivotal point. They had a youth leadership council that desegregated the Asheville City Schools. And that was in 1969, 70, I do believe. And it was done by a woman who I interviewed named Leslie Anderson, who is a consultant in this city right now, who is also downtown development director for the city of Asheville and brought the city of Asheville back. She can give you a lot of first-hand information on that.
All right, we will move to our next agenda item. If there's no discussion on the IFAs, and I would like to thank both IFA groups for y'all presentations and all the work that y'all have been doing. Thank you for your
All right, we're actually going to have the audit scope working group, which is a subgroup of the commission that got together about 3 times virtually to develop a scope to respond to the immediate recommendations. So as the 4 of y'all are making your way to the podium, if we could actually have y'all present from the podium. We have the scope in your packets, and y'all can follow along if you don't mind going to the podium, but if not, then you're welcome to stay at your seats.
Sandu McPeters again.
Bobette Mays.
Bernard Oliphant.
D. Williams.
So essentially, us four, along with county and city reps, Ms. Brenda Mills, Ms. DK, both Ms. Rachel Wood, Ms. Rachel Nygaard, Christine and her team. We met 3 times to essentially look over the scope of this work. We did decide at our last meeting that we didn't want to go and paraphrase what's already in front of you. So essentially, I thought that we would just kind of hit some certain marks about the way that the group kind of went about it. So we took 3 meetings. The first one, we really just went and kind of dissected the scope of work of what was suggested and proposed as far as what the audit should look like. That was a good meeting. There was a lot of questions. I know I can speak on myself and Ms. Bobette because we learned a lot about the jargon, essentially, of what's in the paperwork as far as wording for the documents. We learned about the RFPs and what the proposals are, and we kind of just, in general, learned some good information about what an audit entails, details in that nature. The second meeting we kind of had, we more or less looked at broadening it. I know that Ms. D, I know she will speak on it too. We essentially looked at breaking it down of what do we want and what do we not want within the actual audit. There's a lot of discussion about what should be included, but essentially I think we all agreed, or we did agree, and we came to it that while it is a good proposal, the lengthier and the more stuff that we put into it, the bigger the harm of somebody not accepting it or we not receive the information back from the actual scope of the work. At the third meeting, we essentially finalized with all the edits of what was shared from both city and county and from us, recommendations from Dr. Mullen, essentially broke it down and ended with this frame of work that's in front of you. One piece of measure that's very important is that this has never been done within the city or the county. So while there's plenty of audits that have happened, this scope of work has actually never been completed. So we had a lot of questions. We still have questions essentially of what will be received back from it. But essentially what you see on the second page basically dictates what we will receive back after it is completed.
That's fine. Thank you, everybody, for the listen. Very specifically, a performance audit, unlike a financial audit, is one that looks at tangible outcomes based on data. One of the things that we know from performance audits is there have not been a lot of them around here. My experience has been with the inspectors generals of governments. That is why it was so compelling for me. Most people, a lot of times in localities and municipalities, there's a lot of politics that go on and not a lot of tangible results. You will find a lot of times in a business or environment that performance is key, especially when dollars are concerned. It should be so also in a governmental setting. One of the things that most government auditors who are performance experts look at is the policies and programs and also tangible outcomes, the impact, if you will. And that is what we've not had a lot of in this city. We have a lot of very good service providers, but one of the things you have to keep in mind is that we have to separate the personal from the professional. And when you don't do that, that means that people who are the most vulnerable people always get hurt when performance metrics are not actually the goal that strive for. So what we would like to do is take a look at the policies, the programs, and how strictly these things have been adhered to by service providers. Not only are we looking at the the municipal governments. We're also looking at the subrecipients and NGOs or non-governmental organizations that are awarded contracts, because that is not the business of governments oftentimes to go into the community and render these services. So then it comes down to these awardees who are providing taxpayer funds. That is basically what has been some of our goals throughout this, is to start delivering tangible results, because we've had many programs over 30 years, from CDBG funding to outright utilization of city and county funds, but the harm still perpetuates. And as a matter of fact, it has been exacerbated, and we've never been worse off as a people. I know I can speak for black people. I've never seen it this bad here before. So these programs, even though they're well intended, are not working. And with that, I'll cease. Thank you.
That was a mouthful, I must say. What I first want to say that it was assigned to, like we said, we had never gone through this before. So a lot of things that we did not know about what an audit would entail. And so with the help of Christine and the city and the county, we were able to get through this. I don't feel like it's as complicated and as complex as people may think it is. It is an audit, and it's things that we're asking when we start to review for someone to do the audit process. These are things that we're going to ask for. So as far as, it's 2 minutes? Okay. I had a speed talk. Okay. So, yeah, start the speed talk. So what our purpose was to set up something that when we do have come to people that want to be part of this audit, things that the guidelines that we would have for them and what we would expect to see from them, but not limiting them to do it because we want them to go. We realize that if they're professionals in an audit, they're going to delve into all these other things, and they're going to come up with things that we may not have seen. But we will also know what might be missing pieces that we can work together with. But it would still be, I do believe that it's going to be a plus. I mean, I don't think that it's anything that's going to be harmful. I think that the city and the county have done what they needed to do. And they've given us this opportunity to open up the door for us to gain more than what we've known. I can't speak for all the black people. I can only speak for myself. And I think that it's a pleasure for me to be in this space and time and to speak and to let you know that Asantu and I, we were like dead on it. And we were asking questions because we made, and Mr. Alford, he came in when he could get in. And Dee was on the road all the time, so most of the things that she missed of what we learned, she just wrote it in, or she would send in an email. But I think that if you look over this scope of work, and if you look at all the things, it's not that complicated. We have not delved into a lot of specifics, because that's not what we're going to do with an audit. That's not, this is only the first step for an interview to get ready for the audit review. You don't have Mr. Oswald?
Without a lot of words, accountability, accountability, accountability.
All right. Any questions?
I want to know what areas you plan to focus with the audit, because you got a number of projects that's happening in historically African American communities that I feel those should be like the hot spots to identify. Are people from this community been benefiting from this development, from the south side of Shiloh to Burton Street? There's a number of things going through Hillcrest. There's a number of different projects that's affecting the African American community, and I suggest that those areas be highlighted as areas of focus.
Well, I do believe that is going to be a focal point, but it's not going to be an audit. What they're going to do is to look at the big projection of the data that they receive. Now, if you want to get down to the different communities, and if you look at African American communities, that brings a whole broad picture. But if you look on page 2, they will be focusing on criminal justice, economic development, education, health and wellness, and housing. So they're expected to look into all these areas that we're asking them for an audit for.
make sense?
So essentially, like I think Mr. Dwayne, in answering your question, is that what you're wanting to do is going to be what we gather from the essential audit. Once we get the information and the data that's collected from the scope of the institutions, the entities who are being audited, and the people. One of the questions that we ask, and I'm sorry that we're going over time, but I think that this is important, is that we ask, will the audit entail information for both those who have harmed and from those who both have been harmed? And the answer to that was yes. So essentially, from the information that we get about the audit, essentially our next step is that we will be able to use this data to address the issues, and specifically for those direct markets or pockets or communities that you're looking at.
And if I may interject just very briefly, one of the things that we know is the tax dollars have been expended over the years to not only the city to institute programs, but also to contractors that have been hired and nonprofits and other organizations who say that they serve the African American community. There's going to be have to be some tangible results shown from that, because the data says that we have not been served. We have not been. So there needs to be a disruption in that process. And the only way to properly disrupt that and hold folks accountable or organizations is to use data and to use those contracts. And I know that some of these organizations have been around 30 years or longer. And they are funded in perpetuity. You can look at the CDBG funding list now for the city of Asheville, I believe, on their meeting tomorrow. And some of these organizations have been funded every year for over 20 years and targeting this community. So that needs to be some accountability for that. And that's what the audit is for. And that's what the audit is for. Any more questions?
I don't have a question. I just wanted to say thank y'all.
Oh, thank you. Let's give them a round of applause. So just really quickly, just to give you all sort of the next steps, now that this scope of work has been developed, and I really do want to commend this group for coming together and just taking this recommendation and really just leading by example in terms of implementing. So what does implementation look like? So I really do hope that that is an example of how we can take all of the rest of our recommendations and just start to put the pieces together. So thank y'all for doing that. So the next steps are going to be to put this scope of work in an actual request for proposal document, and that will be published early spring 2023. We know that we want to move quickly on this because it was an immediate recommendation, and this subgroup is also going to be a part of the evaluation committee in looking at the vendor who does come on to do the audit. So I wanted to let y'all know that it's moving along. Our emails are always open, our inboxes are open. So if you do have questions, I encourage you to just read it and then send your feedback to us promptly, because we're moving quickly, so thank you. All right, we're going to move into our presentation. Okay.
So I would like to introduce our presenter for tonight, Ms. Priscilla Nadia Robinson, who will be presenting. And while she gets set up, I would like to offer a 5-minute break to get food, do what you need to do. But let's take a 5-minute break while she gets set up to present to us. And be back here 7:15, please.
A little bit.
I didn't know that. I should have.
Everybody settled, we back, ready?
Yes.
For clarity while we're waiting, to the timekeeper, would you tell me exactly what the bell means, and I think you give 2 or 3 minute warning?
Yes, ma'am. For your presentation, we set aside 25 minutes. So that's including the Q&A.
Really?
Oh, I'm sorry, that's 30 minutes. That's 7:05 to 7:35. That's 30 minutes, and we might have a little time left over for Q&A as well. This is one of the last parts of the agenda, so you'll be good to go. I'll make sure.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So how about are you able to show your presentation? Yes, I can.
It's gonna be a combination.
Okay.
Need the light.
Well, I'll go ahead and get started, and if you need the lights down, then
We
I'll
do.
leave that up to you all.
Yeah, we do. Can we get the lights down?
Come on. So I first want to start out by giving honor to God. It's the reason that I stand here. Honor to my ancestors whose back I stand on, and especially those who were impacted negatively by the implementation of urban renewal. This evening, we were here about the introduction of the website. Dr. Lee will focus on the data tab that focuses on remapping, and Dr. Licinio will focus on specific data. And I'll go ahead and get started. We got a lot to say in such a short time.
I've set the time for 20 minutes, and I'll give you a 2-minute warning. And then if we have time left, we can keep going, but then we'll have 10 minutes also for Q&A.
If I may say, I don't know how to say this, but I don't think that's fair. First of all, other presenters had an hour, and so you're telling me that you're going to take away 10 minutes of our time after we were told 30 minutes?
Okay, I'll set it for 30 minutes.
Thank you. And so, 2009, I started my research as a student at Montreal College. Dr. Licinio and Dr. Lee and I have been working together for over 10 years. We built the website. The website is created to be a voice for uprooted communities, to provide knowledge and promote understanding. And I would like to thank the Preservation Society of Asheville, Buncombe County for sponsoring like copies who didn't get them. Okay, Dr. Lee, let's move on to the gallery tab. The gallery tab includes those who live on the south side. This beautiful young lady in the pink is my grandmother. And if you hover over, it gives information on the pictures. Okay, can we move on to the data tab? The data tab includes remapping and economics. Remapping is a dream that I had. I wanted to remap the community and connect the families and the faces, so we wouldn't just be looking at parcels. We have two different categories. We have the remapping, and then we have the economic side, and we'll hear more about that. Would you please move on to the collaborators? The collaborators is the team, and there you'll find the different credentials. Okay, we can move on to the reparations. We're moving pretty fast here. The reparation tab is just different, I guess, publications, and if you click on them, it'll open those up. And it's publication information for both local and national. Okay, we move on to the blog. The blog is most current events and reports, so you can click on those and it'll open up that information. Okay, we move on to the second gallery. The second gallery is inclusive of the whole Asheville community. Professor Besselel, he's retired from UNCA. He had his class to come to the YMI Cultural Center where we collected stories from some of the elders. Okay, and let's move on to the contact. The contact tab allows individuals to present questions, comments, upload pictures, and history. And if you would like, after this presentation, you can also contact Dr. Macidio and Dr. Lee directly. Okay, we'll move on now to your presentation, Dr. Lee, who will focus on the data tab remap.
All right, so can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for introducing me. I want to introduce our map briefly. In this map, we collaboratively built this map, and there are 4 important functions in this map. The number 1 is searchability. You can search based on person name or street name to search for any parcels that were acquired by the housing authority in the 60s and 70s. So, for example, if I write down Robinson here, you can see all the parcels that has Robin's name here. Not only the owners, but also the tenants here. The second important function is the ability to see the past and the present. So if you see on the left, you see there are 4 different checkboxes. If I turn on everything, you can see the yellow and pink layer, which is coming from the Asheville website. This is city-owned properties currently. And then if I remove the checkbox, you can see the blue dots, which are 1963 city directory, which is basically all the small businesses that were present in the past, in the 60s. Remove that, you see there are clickable parcels. These are basically all the parcels that are acquired during the 60s and 70s. Removing that, you can see the urban renewal map during the 60s that was used as part of the planning. And then if I remove that, you see the current online maps here. So by clicking on and off for these different layers, you can see the past and present at the same time. The third important function is the ability to see the acquisition processes entirely. So if you look at the bottom of the website, there is a year. For now, it's 1964. And if I increase the years, you can see the color coding change, which means that it shows basically the process of acquisition processes. And then if you see on the right, at the same time in that year, you can see the number of number of parcels that are appraised or decided, or whether, how many parcels were done with the transfer of deed, right? So you can see all these kind of analytics by moving the year bar at the bottom. And then finally, at the parcel level, you can see all the necessary information about appraiser processes. When appraiser was done, and when offer was made, when decision was made, and then when the transfer of deed happened, right? And then also you can see the appraisers' names and owners, tenants' names, and also other information such as the photos of the old scenes. And these are all coming from the UNCA special collection documents. So this is a brief introduction of the map we have built. And based on that, I think Ms. Robinson will provide some walkthrough of the maps.
Okay, so what I want to do now is to bring it right in this room. We have many Reparation Commission members the families were impacted by the implementation of urban renewal. And so, Dr. Lee, would you bring up Haynes? The last name Haynes, Haynes.
Could you say the name one more time?
Haynes, Haynes. Mr. Haynes was the owner of a grocery store that sat on the corner of Blanton Street, right across from Brown's Temple. He was able to relocate his business to the Shallow community. Shows you the information that Dr. Lee talked about previously, and for that grocery store, Mr. Haynes was given $6,000. Okay, would you now click on O'Hannon? O'Hannon, O''Hannon. Okay. So if you look, we're not going to click into the parcels this time, but if you look at the O'Hannon family, they own 2, 4, 6, 8 homes on the south side. And so that family, the O'Hannon family, lost a lot of wealth, generational wealth. Okay, let's click on last name Nance, Nance. Nance, their property was acquisition, and if you look at the information, whenever you see court award, that means they fought. They fought trying to save their property, but they didn't win. The transfer of deed happened, and they were given $3,000 for their property. But they were able to repurchase a home in the community, and the relative, the daughter still lives in the home currently. Okay, Dr. Lee, do you have anything else that you want to share?
On my side, no.
Okay.
If you want to show more parcels, it's possible.
No, let's go ahead and move on to Dr. Macinio, because he has more of data.
Sounds good.
Dr.
Thank you so much.
Macinio.
I will stop sharing.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to go full screen here. If I'm not loud enough, please let me know. You're able to see this?
Yes, Dr. Macinio.
Okay, wonderful. So it's my honor and privilege to participate tonight. And our goal is to share some of the data findings with the Commission. In addition to Priscilla and Myung, I would quickly like to acknowledge a number of collaborators who took part in a second study. Ray McCoy, Mark Conrad, Rosie Grant, Alexis Hill, Philip Nicholas, Noah Shear, and Alan Weirdak, located from Minnesota, West Virginia, California to Maryland. So these are some of the research questions we asked with input from some of the community members. Questions about who, how much, which, and when. So I'm going to go over these 7 questions, but mostly, in the interest of time, focus on the third one, which is something that's been mentioned in previous meetings that seems to be of importance. Which properties does the city still own? There's much greater detail, we'll come back to that, in an executive report with lots of graphics and all the data and analyses and visualizations, and also in a companion paper that goes with this. Some acknowledgements first. All of our data analyses use content and data from Asheville. The land acquisition files at UNC Asheville, and the rest of the data is from the county. It's Buncombe County GIS, both parcel ownership and property cards, and Buncombe County Register of Deeds information. So before I get started, a challenge I have to mention. The biggest challenge has been connecting the pre and post urban renewal data. So I'm going to pick just one property quickly to illustrate why this is a huge challenge. If you look on the right at 10 Gilliam Place, that's between South French Broad and Blanton, just north of Pfeiffer. That's that blue kind of shoe-like parcel. That's the current property. If you go back on the left, the study we did was in June 2022, last summer. If you go back to the left, you'll see June 1965. So what you should notice here is that in 1965, there were 8 properties that overlapped with 10 Gilliam Place. I list the owners there and some pictures. 4 located on South Grove Street and 4 located on Blanton Street. And of course, neither do South Grove Street nor Dewitt Street exist anymore. So that's one of the challenges of relating the present from things that are now obscured very often or even invisible. How did we solve that? Well, our solution was to calculate, this slide is a little more technical, but it's kind of behind the scenes, to calculate percentages of parcel overlap. So the goal was to understand how current parcels were assembled. And what we essentially did was a reverse engineering to map back to the past. And so if you look at the graph on the picture on the left, what we're essentially saying is that 10 Gilliam Place was constructed with portions of those 8 parcels. And we characterize the portions, 35% of 1517, and down on the right-hand side, 2% of 1617. Doing that kind of calculation, and that's automated, for modern current parcels in Asheville, allows us to tell kind of the origin story of all the current parcels and connect the past to the present. That's really been what's been missing. And now that we've been able to solve that, we can ask all kinds of research questions, such as the preliminary questions we're sharing with you tonight. So really quickly, what you learn by doing this kind of mapping is that 10 Gilliam Place was repackaged over a 6-year period from 68 to 75, using 8 acquisition parcels at a calculated purchase cost of $23,000. It was resold 3 years later in 78 for $5,400. And in the afterlife, in June 2022, that one property is valued by the county, so it's all county city data, close to $350,000. So this is what we did. We essentially did this kind of mapping, intersection, percentage overlap, not just for the yellow property there, but for all 224 current parcels, connecting them to the 930 acquisition parcels in our database. So let's tackle the questions now. Who was affected by urban renewal? Well, you saw that in Myung's presentation. From our database, we can draw a list of all the former owners and renters. So this potentially speaks to the question of who was affected or who was harmed. We can identify individuals, their families. B, how much did the city of Asheville pay for urban renewal properties? So we have lots of graphics, but here's an executive summary. The total acquisition parcel was a little over $6 million across all 930 acquisition parcels. The median acquisition parcel value was just a little over $5,000, meaning that half of the owners were offered more than $5,000, half were offered less. But the important number is that 85% of all the acquisitions were below 10K. So it really shows you kind of the range where properties were purchased. C, which properties does the city still own? So to answer this question, we went back to one additional city data set. This was something published June 3rd, 2021 by the city of Asheville. And they released a story map website showing all the city-owned properties that came from urban renewal. If we go to that website on the left, you see that there are 13 properties, based according to the city, on the south side that are still owned by the city. So we took, those are the orange and then one fuchsia parcel on the left. So we took those 13 parcels, dropped them on our map, and we also used the 1963 Asheville Historical City Directory or phone book. So what I'm going to show you in the next minute or two, we're going to zoom into one of those 13 parcels, parcel number 4 on the right, the one that's fuchsia colored. So that's zooming into city parcel number 4, also known as Future Nasty Branch Greenway. As of June 2022, it appeared to be vacant. That's located along the Town Branch Greenway, bounded by South French Broad Avenue and Congress Street and Gaston Street, west and east, and Choctaw Street, Livingston Street, north and south. As you know, it's just north of the former Livingston Street School. If we take this parcel, this single city-owned parcel, and show the impact of urban renewal on that parcel, we get a much clearer idea of what happened. You look at the impact on businesses, there are at least, we know there are more, but there are at least 23 businesses were erased. These include grocery stores, churches, restaurants, beauty parlors, barber shops, etc. If you look at the impact of city parcel number 4 on the loss of homes, from our database, we identify 34 acquisition parcels. We show the pictures of the homes, and there's some absolutely beautiful homes here. It's pristine properties. So what can we conclude from that? Well, when we try to measure the impact of city-owned properties, if you do that kind of overlap, not just for number 4, but for all 13 of those city-owned parcels, you come up with 169 acquisition parcels that were affected. This represents 18% of the original pool of the 930 acquisition parcels. So it's really significant, and it puts things in a different perspective. If we go one step further and we look at Housing Authority of the City of Asheville, HACA-owned properties, there's 7 of them. Of course, you recognize Erskine, Livingston Heights, Walton, Livingston Street, etc. If you take those 7 parcels, they intersect or overlap with 147 formerly acquisition or acquisition parcels. That's an additional 16% of the original pool of 930 acquisition parcels. So if you combine those two effects of HACA-owned and city-owned properties, there's a 34% combined in urban renewal impact. This is just for 20 modern or current parcels. So those parcels were repackaged during urban renewal into these very, very large chunks, but they overlap with 316 properties. This represents over a third of the original pool of 930 acquisition parcels. So the group believes that this is really an indication of the depth of the legacy of urban renewal in Asheville. It's not a few parcels, it's a few modern parcels, but over a third of the original pool that is still owned, lease controlled. Okay, I'm gonna move a little faster here because we only have a few minutes left. How much are those properties now worth? We did a systematic analysis and came up with about a 400% increase in the valuation of these current 224 parcels since urban renewal. This is after inflation adjustment. We used inflation adjustment calculators. And this is all based on Buncombe County's parcel ownership dashboard. That's a very conservative increase. We did a few studies for parts of the neighborhood where we looked at commercial valuations like Zillow, and the percentage of increase in valuation is even higher, up to 1,000% in some areas. This indicates that urban renewal really deprived the Southside homeowners of a significant source of intergenerational wealth. And for the first time, we have data in numbers that can be audited and looked at and examined, and we can ask other kinds of questions. This was an interesting question we were asked. When did the city start reselling these properties? So the process was repackaging all the acquisition properties into larger chunks. That's the 224. And the city and HACA, primarily HACA, but also the city, resold these repackaged, reconfigured parcels. This was a surprising finding, not just in the 70s and 80s, but over a 5-decade period. So while 86 of the repackaged parcels were resold immediately or very quickly in the 70s and 80s, there's another 14% that was offloaded in the 90s, 2000s, and 2010s. This is really worth looking at. And I'm going to finish with another question or so. We call the first round beneficiaries of the reselling of these repackaged properties repurchasers. And I'll show you why that matters next. So before I do that, one more research question. How much were these properties resold for? This was a very surprising finding. The repackaged parcels were resold at discounted prices. The median value of the resold parcels was less than a fifth of their acquisition value. This indicates that the majority of the repackaged parcels were first resold for a small fraction. As a matter of fact, 83% of the parcels were resold by HACA in the city below acquisition cost. And the total resale revenue was only $3 million as opposed to over $6 million for the acquisition. And this is, I think, our last question. Who was able to repurchase these properties? So we did an analysis of the first round. It's almost like the first stock buyers, the first round of repurchasers. Categorized them as follows. 46% of them were individuals, 40% of them were businesses. The city shows up 7% of the time, HACA 3% of the time, churches 3%, county 1%. Out of the 224 repackaged parcels, there were 152 unique repurchasers, which means you had serial buyers, or people who bought many properties. In the top 10 repurchasers, were responsible for buying almost a third of all 224 repackaged parcels. None of the top 10 repurchasers were individuals. They were real estate businesses, property management businesses, companies, etc. Only 14 individuals who lost their property in the South Side, based on our database, were able to come back in the first round and repurchase a property. We saw one of them, I think Nance fell in that category, her family, after losing their property. These 14 individuals represent 9% of the 152 unique repurchasers. So what you see here is that there wasn't much success for individuals to come back, at least in the first round. And I'm going to conclude here and pass the mic back to Priscilla for her final words. I hope this information was useful.
Very useful.
That concludes our presentation. You can find more information, more specific information at urbanrenewalimpact.org. Again, that's urbanrenewalimpact.org. We focused on the south side because that's where I was born and raised, and it captured my attention as I looked at the urban renewal files at UNC Asheville Special Collection. You will also find the link to the full executive summary and resources that Dr. Messenio shared. And again, I thank you, the Reparations Commission. I want to acknowledge the mayor being here, the city manager, and the county staff. Thank you all, and thank you, Madam Time, for giving us the time.
Thank you.
So before you leave, Ms. Robinson, I would like to open it up for questions. If anybody have any questions or would like any more information.
I just want to make a comment real quick. Oh, I'm sorry. Was it somebody else?
No, go ahead.
Okay. I want to tell you, Ms. Robinson, Ms. Priscilla, thank you for the work that you've been doing on this. Before anybody sat at this table, I remember you sharing this presentation with those two gentlemen with me. It probably wasn't in the form that it is in now, but I just wanted to say, even then, it was sobering, but the work that you're doing lets us know that this work can be done. These numbers can come out. It's not hard to find. Average, everyday lay folk can find it. And I'm just so happy that people like you are out there doing this when people aren't watching you, people aren't asking you to do it. And I just really appreciate it because it made my job a lot easier. And just thank you. What you've done was hella dope. I really appreciate it, but it's also sobering. And if nobody has ever told you, we appreciate you, I appreciate you. So thank you.
Ms. Priscilla, would you be interested in coming back to our housing meeting and discussing some of these issues with us?
Yes, ma'am.
I think that would be a great time for economic development and housing to have a joint meeting. And as those things directly overlap, and the quantification of the loss together with the target, maybe say for the future, if we could link those two groups together for that, it would save time for her and allow us to work together with profound numbers.
Ms. Robinson, very much aware that you did Southside because it was personal to you. That was not the only community within the African American community to be involved and to be torn up with urban renewal. Do you have plans to do any other communities?
If I'm invited to do so. From my understanding, East End they have someone already looking at the files. So I would be more than happy to collaborate with them in other communities to kind of guide in how and what we did.
Thank you.
Most of this is about the owners who own property, but we know that, well, I would like to know the percentage of blacks that own property in the 1940s doing urban renewal, and also what happened to the renters. Where did they go?
Okay, from my understanding and what I can see, what I determined, there were three main groups impacted. You had the homeowners, you had those who rented, so they were very happy about going to housing. And then you had the renters, you had the homeowners, and you had the landlords. And I'll tell you this is just my own opinion. The blighted homes that we saw
were a result of slum landlords. And out of that, the certificate of occupancy was born. So now, today, you know, the houses have to be inspected and deemed in livable condition.
Part of our history, when they opened up all of the projects in the 50s and 60s, was that for a lot of us, those project structures were better than the homes they came from. They were so dilapidated, so torn down.
Well, if you were to look on the website and look up Little John, Bernice Little John, you would see that her home was in perfect condition. And she was a widow whose home was taken, and she was placed in the high-rise that is still now active on Southridge Broad. A lot of those homes were in perfect condition. A lot of those homes had gardens. There was no food desert. No one went hungry and no one was homeless. It was a community that stuck together. And I venture to say, once we integrated in other communities where we were not wanted, as I think D. Williams stated, it was a nightmare. Thomas McCall, if you look up his book, he named it Them, and he talked about how moving into a Caucasian community, and he would peep out at them, and he knew they were peeping out back at them. And then another book I would like to recommend is Dr. Mindy Fuller's book. She talks about how tearing up communities impact the health, the mental status. I mean, she goes down the line. She doesn't just focus on housing. So that would be a good book to get and to read. And actually, it would be awesome if you could bring her here to speak or have her speak, using as we use. She came here some years ago when we first started this conversation, but I think it would really be worth you listening to her as a speaker.
I want to thank you again for coming and presenting, and thank your team. Like, that was awesome, and I'm super excited to hear how the project has grown, because it is amazing, and thank you again. And so we will now.
I have one question.
Oh, sorry.
I think you said you had 14 copies of the cross. Can we as a commission get more copies?
Because I'd like to have one of yours.
Say again?
How would that work?
Can you repeat
I'd
that?
like to have one.
She got 13 copies, but if anybody else wanted copies or extra copies, could we as a commission?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Lowe.
Title is
Dr. Mindy Fuller, Urban Fruit Shop. Yes, it's in the book, and it's on the website.
Okay, just to move on really quickly, just in the interest of time, I think we're only going to be able to do, I want to give y'all an update on community engagement and communication, and then we'll hear from public comment. So there's a flyer that's included in y'all's meeting packet. We also have extra copies of this flyer. We'll also make it available digitally. Really, we just wanted to show the commission and show the community that we do want this to be an open process. And so this flyer really just answers some of the basic questions. What is reparations? What does it mean for Asheville and Buncombe County? How can you get involved? So we wanted to just highlight this, and we'll send it out also virtually. It has information about the website. It has information about, how you can sign up to learn more. Additionally, after this, I'm going to be sending out a link to commission members to sign up for community events if you would like to go and speak on behalf of the commission. Buncombe County is helping us to organize almost, I don't want to call it a speakers bureau, but organize a system to where we can share community events that are happening. so that if you are available for those events, you can go and represent the commission. So what I'm gonna do is send out a link after this meeting, and it'll be a sign up. You'll have all the dates and the details of those events. And then a flyer like this would be a tool that you would take with you, so that if folks in the community have questions about what reparations is, y'all will be equipped to point them in the right direction. All right, that's it.
All right.
Yeah, 2 minutes left.
So, we are going to bypass the round table and move, because I want to make sure we have time for public comment and to allow those who have signed up to speak. And the first person signed up is Jonathan Wainscott. So each person that's speaking as a part of public comment, you have 3 minutes.
3 minutes. I'm familiar. I do this at City Council quite often. My name is Jonathan Wainscott, and I've lived here in Asheville for 25 years or so. The last couple of years, I've been doing a deep dive in the history of Asheville as it pertains to Black involvement in city government. You hear a lot of these dates talking about the urban renewal that took place in the 60s. Redlining maps were drawn in the 1930s. Asheville didn't have a Black council person until 1969 when Reuben Daley was elected. Prior to that, Asheville did have 1 Black alderman, and that was Newton Shepherd. He was elected in 1881, 1882, and 1883, which was 1883 was the year that Asheville incorporated as a city. So in that year also, the police department was formed, and 1 Black officer was on the force. There were only 2 officers on the force at all. So that was definitely the high watermark of Black political achievement in the 19th century. And then you got to ask, what happened after that? And I can't possibly tell you all of that in 2 minutes, but I'd be happy to talk to you more about that any time. Asheville City Council, as we know it, was formed in 1931, and I've calculated the amount of Black representation on this City Council, not the one here today, but this body, since 1931, and it turns out that there's only been 8.6% African American participation on the City Council every year. That's it. 8.6% on that body basically represents 3/5 of a person. That's all that's happened. Terry Bellamy is responsible for 25% of the African American representation on City Council, 1 person. The other 25% came after Terry Bellamy. So half of the representation for Blacks in Asheville has only come since Terry Bellamy was here. So the underlying policies that allow for all of these things to happen, for urban renewal, for sketchy COs and all of that, happened with governments that were designed specifically to exclude Black people. The formation of this Asheville City Council in 1931 is surrounded by efforts to disenfranchise Black people, including repealing the absentee voting provision for the municipal election, specifically for Buncombe County, 2 months before the referendum that created this government that we have today. And I've done a ton of research around this, and like I said, I can't really spill it all out in 3 minutes, and thanks for listening.
Thank you. Robert Hardy, how you doing, sir?
Yeah. First, giving praise to the universal Most High. I commend all of you to continue doing what you do. Whatever it is, whatever gift gift you have been given from the Most High toward this issue is relevant. Proverbially speaking, while we are caught up in the paralysis of analysis, the more things change, the more they appear to remain the same. For the disadvantaged and disenfranchised, they merely rearrange and remain the same. As Dee said, even worse. Therefore, as we continue to beat around the bush, sweep the dirt up under the rug, and kicking the can down the road, when are we going to get down to business? I was able to attend 3 meetings. One was the African American Experience in the Smokies, presented by AARP at the Swananoe Valley Museum. I discerned from that meeting that as early as 1540, Hernando de Soto's expedition, there were African Americans that arrived in the mountains. In another meeting on February the 13th, I had a question for Dr. Mullins, but it was a 3-part question, and the way they handled the session, I deferred the question to later. That is, why was the state of Black Asheville discontinued? At that meeting, Ms. Mills and everybody, I can be interrupted by the city's representative and the county said they didn't have the financial support of the data. Well, Ms. Robinson just proved that we have, and what we need to do as a community is connect with AB Tech, UNCA, Warren Wilson, and all of the brain trust of North Carolina to presume to get the data that we need. I believe there was a question asked at that Hill Street meeting, if I'm not mistaken. I stand to be corrected, and you can interrupt me at any time. Also, at a meeting concerning housing at the Grant Center, less than so many yards from my house, kept my mouth shut for a couple hours and just listened. I believe that when it comes down to affordable housing, you're dealing with a false and racist narrative. There can be no affordable housing unless you have a means median living wage. You're joking. You're kidding yourself. We live in a global economy. The infrastructure that was stated in that meeting is going to be very, very high, and there's no guarantee that you start off with living in affordable housing for the first few years, and then because of the nature of the economy, the person owning the house is going to want to increase that rate. So what is affordable about that? So the issue is that as you continue in your efforts, and I encourage you to continue, because I'm getting ready to take my ink pen to work. And I'm going to present myself as some of the injustices of this situation of urban renewal, and even nowadays, as a test dummy. I assure you, you will not embarrass me, and you won't make me ashamed.
Thank
God's
you.
peace.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, thank you for those who spoke for public comment. So, without further ado, we'll do the wrap up. It was a great meeting. Thank y'all for staying a little bit over our 8 o'clock cutoff to listen to our public comment. And be present for that. So I would like to see who would like to make a motion to adjourn the meeting. I move. All those in favor? All right, we got it.
Yeah.